Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Wednesday, January the 31st, 2024. Continuing to talk about our gospel reading from this past Sunday, which was Mark 5, 21 to 43, I believe. And the two healing stories, the one of the woman who had been plagued by the bleeding, the hemorrhaging for 12 long years and had done everything she could, sought out every physician that she could find, spent all the money, and her condition kept getting worse. And then also the story of Jairus's daughter who, when the father approaches Jesus, she's on her deathbed when Jesus is momentarily distracted by the woman who touches his cloak, the woman with the hemorrhaging. By the time Jesus gets to Jairus's home, the little girl is dead, but Jesus indicates she's only sleeping, and he asks her to get up, and she does. But at the end of that, in fact, the last verse, verse 43, people obviously were amazed at what he was able to do. And then Mark tells us that he, meaning Jesus, strictly ordered them that no one should know about this, and then told them to give her something to eat. Strictly ordered them that no one should know this. And that seems to be very often the case, that Jesus didn't necessarily, especially with miracles, didn't want the word to get out. And in fact, one of our Sunday school teachers approached me on Sunday morning and said, why is that, Pastor? And so I looked into it and I shared with him a couple of things that I found online that I'll share with you now. Because, why not? Why not heal everybody? What's the point? Why is Jesus always saying that? One source indicated this to our way of thinking, okay? It would seem that Jesus would want everybody to know about the miracle. But Jesus knew that publicity over such miracles might hinder his mission and divert public attention away from his message. Also, along with that, Jesus did not want people focusing on the miracles he performed, but rather the message he proclaimed and the death he was going to die. The same is true today. God would rather that we be focused on the healing miracle of salvation through Jesus Christ instead of focusing on other healings and or miracles. Someone else responded in this way. On the heels on various miracles, Jesus seems to command silence with two objectives. First, he may be attempting to prolong his ability to travel due to ever-growing crowds. Later in Mark 6. Indeed, regularly in Mark, we see how Jesus seeks solitude but is thwarted by the crowds. And secondly, this person writes, he may have been mitigating the spread of misinformation about him to avoid, again, raising suspicions of his opponents and preventing things from spiraling out of hand before the right time. In other words, for outsiders, the secrecy motif, that scholars talk about that, why, especially in Mark, why this theme of secrecy relates to concealing who Jesus is and isn't until the proper time has arrived for his true revealing. In some, Jesus' commands to silence seem aimed at controlling the spread of information about Jesus, as well as its timing. He's the Messiah, the divine Son, but that is only revealed at his death and resurrection. So, several explanations for why Jesus didn't want that to happen. But we also know that Jesus didn't heal everybody. And that kind of is problematic at times. And yesterday when I talked about my own dad's situation and the medical miracles really, in retrospect that he experienced, and we know that other people do even more dramatic than my dad's, but still the fact remains that not everybody is healed. And so there's a great story. I've shared it before, but it's one of my favorites, so I'll share it again, where Tony Campolo talks about a situation in which, as he writes, as he entitles the story, not cured, but healed. He writes, a couple of years ago, I was at a church conference in South Africa. The other speaker was one of the founders of the movement often referred to as the Toronto Blessing. And it's a movement that very much believes in the theology of signs and wonders. And those engaged in this ministry contend that miracles are a part of the witness that we should have to an unbelieving world as we try to win people for Christ. And so he talks about the fact that, he was asked, if he was into healing people, and he kind of had to confess that he had never really seen anything spectacular happen. Well, then he goes on to relate that the following week he was back in the United States and preaching at a church in Oregon, and on impulse, as he ended the service, he said, "I said to the congregation, if anyone wanted to remain behind for healing, I would be glad to pray with them. I told them they shouldn't expect much to happen because nothing much happens when I pray. But if they wanted to give it a try, I'd be willing to pray as hard as I could." And surprisingly, he said, about 30 people stayed behind and waited patiently as I prayed for one after the other. And I did not want to do this healing thing fast, like some of the healers I see on television. I wanted to really talk to a person before I prayed, get a feel for what was on that person's heart. I wanted to hug each person and connect with him or her as deeply as I knew how. And I did that with each of the people who stayed behind. And in each case, I put some olive oil that I'd brought along with me on each of their heads. It took me more than an hour to pray through that little group, but I did it. What intrigued me was that most of the people who would come for healing had nothing physically wrong with them. One man needed healing for an addiction to pornography. One woman wanted help for her marriage. Someone else asked healing for anger, but there were a few who did have physical illnesses. Well, 4 days later, he says, I got a phone call, and the woman at the other end said, "Tony, on Sunday you prayed for my husband. He had cancer." And when I heard the word "had," he writes, my heart quickened a bit. "Had cancer?" Tony asked. And the woman answered, "Well, he's dead now." And when she said that, I thought to myself, a lot of good I do. And then the woman said, "You don't understand. When my husband and I walked into that church on Sunday, he was angry with God. He had cancer and he knew he was going to be dead soon, and he hated God for letting it happen. He wanted to see his grandchildren grow up more than anything. At night, he would lie in bed and curse God. It was horrible. And the angrier that he got toward God, the meaner he was to everyone around him. It was unbearable to be in the same room with him. His nastiness just kept getting worse and worse and worse. But then you laid hands on him on Sunday morning and you prayed for him. And when he walked out of church, I knew there was something different. I could feel it. He was a different person. And the last 4 days of our lives have been the best 4 days we've ever had together. We talked and laughed. We even sang hymns with each other. It was a good time. And she paused and then added something really profound. She said, "Tony, he wasn't cured, but he was healed." And I hung up the phone, writes Campolo, knowing that I had learned something about the work of the Holy Spirit. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. We don't understand why some people are healed, either in ways that we can't explain or through, the medical miracles that we're able to accomplish in this day and age. Why are some people healed? Some people are healed, some people aren't. But the story always has really had an effect on me, that we won't always be healed, we won't always be cured, but we all can be healed in the sense of having faith to overcome whatever that illness would be, not in the sense that we're going to conquer it, but to come to peace with it and come to the peace of knowing that our lives on this earth are not all there's going to be, and that there's healing in that power and in that hope and in that promise that God makes to us in Jesus Christ. So it helps us maybe keep things in a little bit of perspective. Well, hope you have a great day today. We're going to continue talking about this, talk a little bit about fear, because faith and fear seems to be a part of that passage as well. So until then, take care. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.